Today we wanted to talk a little bit about impact. How can we know that our work is delivering on its intentions? How do we know it's having impact? And we wanted to share a couple of ways that you can think about it. There are so many more ways to think about it than this, but just to get our kind of intellectual juices flowing. So one way to think about measuring impact is to take all those acronyms, DEI and B, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and think about how you might measure improvements, kind of the state of what's happening in each of those areas. Another area that often gets measured is change management or organizational readiness. So we'll talk a little bit more about what some of these measures might mean to you and to your organization. But one way to think about measuring impact is to take each of those areas and think about how you might ensure that you're moving the needle or diagnosing critical issues that need to be uncovered in your organization. Another way to think about measuring change is the model of change that you use in your organization. So for example, how does your organization try to deliver on its intentions around diversity, equity, inclusion? At the lab where I work, we approach change as a small wins approach to change, meaning we'll look at a target area of change. For example, we want to improve the way we onboard new employees, and we'll look at measurement to see how well we're doing. Do we have people rising equally up to the first level of promotion? Do we have people reporting that they feel included on teams when we do a pulse survey? So we'll take a target area of change, and therefore the measurements we would look at is to see whether in all those areas we looked at, there was movement forward. Another approach to change is, for example, I love that there are so many ERG, BRG, and affinity group leaders here. Another one is to say that when people have the community and connections they need in order to thrive in our organization, that will be how we create change. And some of the measures might be, how do we think about the roles of ERG? Are they resourced? Do they have the executive sponsorship? And do they have the plans in place to create the change they want? And the change might be, for example, in affinity, might be in professional development of the members of the ERGs, or it might be in how the organization is leveraging the expertise of the ERG in its work around diversity, equity, inclusion. Another model of change might be providing resources to employees, ensuring processes are in place to make everything as equitable and inclusive as possible. So where we might look there is, do the policies include everyone? For example, if we have a parental leave policy, does that include adoptive parents, LGBTQ parents, or do we inadvertently have policies that don't cover all of our employees? And so one way to evaluate that is to take everything we do, from hiring to our HR practices, take a DEI lens and ensure that we've covered and thought about all the ways employees consider. And again, you might have another model that you think about, and how you measure impact would depend on that model. Now, as we all know, and it's also really important to think about what measures you use. I just got an announcement today that Australia is changing the way they're doing their official counting of citizens to include sexual orientation. So how you and what you measure is also really critical. In terms of, somehow my PowerPoint just closed, so I think it's reopening. Another area is organizational readiness, and looking at things like, do we have values in place that reflect our diversity, equity, inclusion? Let's see. PowerPoint, are you back? It says it's auto-saved and it's coming right back up. There it is. I never had that happen. So there we are, and we're right here. So do we have values in place so employees know what our priorities are, how we measure change? Do we have, education in place so people can develop these really good skills? Are our policies aligned to our values? Do we have practices at the informal level, the way people are treated in team meetings? And do individual managers, do individual contributors enact the behaviors that align with our values? And another way to think about it is, especially now in this time of great awakenings of organization, thinking about the impact in our communities, bringing external activism inside and bringing employees in our company externally through things like corporate social responsibility or through councils and partnerships that we participate in. So many ways to think about impact. I'm going to stop sharing and have Melanie and I have a quick discussion of that. So one of the reasons why I was so excited to have this conversation with Melanie is you work at such a great company. You do the work of measurement. And so from the beginning, your company has been committed to diversity, equity, inclusion, even before it became something that a lot of companies turned to. So I wonder if you could start off just by sharing, maybe kind of thinking about what is it like to do this work of diversity, equity, inclusion in a company that really values it and wants to do the right thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it definitely makes the job a little bit easier. Um, and I think, my approach and philosophy around doing this work aligns well with SurveyMonkey because SurveyMonkey is a data company. I mean, our mission is to empower others with data, right? So hopefully everyone knows who SurveyMonkey is and you've taken a SurveyMonkey survey, but that's one of the things that we do is we gather data and we can empower others to use that data. And I think that it is incredibly important to take a really sort of data driven and purposeful approach to doing DEI work within your companies, right? So in building out and launching our DEI program formally, we did something called the materiality assessment, which for like the ERG and social impact folks in the crowd probably know what that is. But essentially, it's talking to your stakeholders and gathering data around what issues are most important to them based upon their position as a stakeholder in the company. So as an employee of SurveyMonkey, what issues are most important to you? As a board member of SurveyMonkey, as a customer. And so the approach that I sort of have in building that work and aligning it with issues that are most important to our stakeholders and being really purposeful about gathering data and measuring impact is something that aligns really well with who we are as a company.
Melanie, I wonder if you could share with us some of the measurements you discovered either through doing that qualitative work first into quantitative or other ways that you've really found that these are measures or ways of evaluating the impact of your DEI work within SurveyMonkey that you would like to share with our group. There's so many ways to measure success, and I find it really fascinating to hear kind of latest thinking in this area.
Yeah, I mean, that's a question I think that a lot of us struggle with is, what is the data you should be looking at? What is the impact you should be measuring? So a couple of things. I think it is, so SurveyMonkey at the end of 2019, we actually published externally, both internally, but also externally, diversity goals around representation. So what we want representation to look like from a gender perspective and from an ethnicity perspective. We published a 1 year and a 5-year goal. I think publishing specific goals is really important because, there are companies out there that just say, okay, well, we just want to do better. We want to make progress. Okay, is a 1% difference progress? Is 5% progress? You know what I mean? And so I think having specific goals that you can, as a company, look to and say, here's what we want to achieve, just like any other business goal, really, is, I think, a good first step and is something that is really important to do. And so we did that. Our 1 year goal was end of 2020, and we actually achieved our ethnicity goal. We exceeded our ethnicity goal, but we unfortunately did not meet our gender goal. But that was something that also gave us the ability to go, okay, how come we didn't meet this? And what are the things that we need to be doing to change? Whereas if we just said, well, hey, we went up almost 1% in terms of our representation, and we wanted to go, instead of we went up 1% but wanted to go up 2%. That's a different, that's a different story. So I think that's really important. Another thing that I think is really important is, building this into other business metrics, right? So every for-profit company has OKRs, KPIs, whatever you want to call them, but objectives or metrics around sales, around product and features and product launches. I mean, having um, goals and objectives around DEI should be just like any other business imperative. It is just as important, particularly in a tech company. Our biggest asset is our people, and we wouldn't have sales or a product if we didn't have a diverse group of people who were innovating and doing that work for us. So I think that is the other important thing, is to really build this into how you do business. And then I think the third thing is to hold people accountable for positive progress and not achieving, right? So just like if you launch a product late, somebody gets held accountable for that product being launched late, right? Somebody should be held accountable for not achieving a particular goal or metric that you've set around this work. So that's sort of generally our approach to, sort of data insights. And then, the other part of that is not to just focus on the diversity and the representation, but also focusing on inclusion and belonging. And so we actually do a lot of data gathering. We have our own belonging and inclusion survey. So we do a lot of data gathering from employees on, like, do you actually feel like you belong here? Do you feel like you can raise a contrary opinion and people will listen to you? Do you feel comfortable, in different scenarios? So I think, also not just focusing on, on diversity data, but also focusing on other types of data as well.
And Melanie, you raised such a great point. Last year, a lot of companies, a lot of CEOs pledged to do better to support the Black Lives Matter movement. And when we were talking about this panel, you said one of the other areas of impact is thinking about our role in the community and how we have impact there. And could you share with us even some of the gaps you've identified that companies need to try to figure out how to think about that relationship with the community and how to measure impact there?
Well, that's a big question. Sure. So a couple of things. So one, a lot of the work that I'm going to be doing for 2021 is going to be focused on what we call advocacy and public policy work. So how do we actually advocate for change at a systems level? So how do we change legislation? How do we change policy to support different underrepresented and diverse communities? And I think that is a really important part of this work that a lot of companies either don't prioritize or overlook, because that is really long-term work. It's hard work to do. It's kind of a lot of behind the scenes, being able to influence legislation that comes out of those. But I think it is important because the reason that we are in this position and the reason that there are diversity leaders is because we've had a system that has negatively impacted various groups of people. And so working to change that system is an important part of this work. I think, just in terms of things that we, gaps that we have discovered, I would say, we do a lot of work with various different organizations or companies to understand what the challenges are for different diverse communities so that we can understand how to fix those challenges. One interesting piece of work that we have done, which we're still in the midst of, but we're doing research around diverse entrepreneurs and what are the challenges that Latina entrepreneurs face? What are the challenges that Black female entrepreneurs face? And so being able to understand those challenges can then help us figure out how we can be part of that solution. So I think understanding what gaps there are, or what issues different communities are grappling with, is a way to be able to start doing work in this space. And then the last thing I would say is, we do a lot of work through our employee resource groups. I know there's a lot of folks here who are members of employee resource groups. And one of the things that we decided in 2020 to do as a company is we actually compensate the leaders of our employee resource groups. So we provide the leaders of those groups with a bonus twice a year. They have to fill out a very short, kind of one-page progress report, like, here are the things that our ERG did, and then they are given a bonus. And it's we don't discount the bonus if we don't think they've done enough. We just want to understand what the impact is that they've had, and then they are given compensation for doing that. Because I think a lot of companies, they build these great communities, and they rely on these great communities for so much of this work, but they all have other jobs. Like, they all have regular jobs. And so why aren't we treating this, similar to their other jobs that they have? And we wouldn't ask them to build a product for free. We wouldn't ask them to develop a product feature for free. We wouldn't ask them to write a communications plan for something for free. So, why are we asking those groups to do that? So that I think is an important gap that we discovered that we are trying to remedy.
I love that approach, Melanie. And it's something I saw one person say that's really great. And it's very visionary. And I hope other companies pick up on that.